Good evening, and welcome back to Defining Virtuosity. I'm Odin Rathnam, Professor of Violin at Cleveland State University. I want to give a big shout out tonight to my South Indian friends. As some of you know, I'm half Indian and half Danish, and I'm happy to have some followers now in South India, hopefully working on these principles and applying them. It's been a big dream of mine to share this teaching with fellow South Indians, and so welcome. The reason I thought of you specifically tonight is because I had some conversations with a dear friend of mine named Vijay Upin about the teaching materials used in India when he was studying with a very famous teacher 35 years ago, 40 years ago. And at the time, the Wohlfahrt studies weren't really used. The Kaisers were used, and then of course Kreutzers and some other materials. But this reminds very much of one of the first Kaiser etudes. This number 4 has a similar rhythm, and it's a happy little piece that combines stopped strokes with détachés. So basically, the idea is two détachés going legato into an eighth note that's stopped at the end, so that the next 16th note is clearly articulated. The idea being that we don't have edge on the front end of any eighth note, but that it's smooth, but we catch. So that we have that clarity, and also so that by stopping, if we have a string crossing between the eighth note and the next 16th, that string crossing will happen before the stroke is executed. Again, referring back to the correlation discussed in Galamian's final chapter on practice in the Galamian book, Principles of Violin Playing and Teaching. And I think it's a fantastic thing because it makes everything easier. If you're doing Brahms concerto and you stop on the next, everything becomes slow motion to you. Nothing feels fast. You're ready before. And then putting it together and getting rid of the stop later is easy. But it makes sure that every action that we do is carefully planned. And we're not worrying about, oh, it's Brahms concerto, or oh, it's Wohlfahrt number 4. No, it's the same. We have a system that we use for everything. We apply it across the boards, and it makes at least the mechanical execution clear. What I don't want you to do is to get boxed into it, because later on, you'd never hear me coaching a student playing Bach to have clicks and catches on every stroke. It just wouldn't be stylistically appropriate, for example. But these skills for young artists, for now, in the beginning stages, are very important for organizing how the two hands work together so that we have a clean approach to the fiddle, no extra noise. Yeah. So the basic premise is an eighth note, a caught 16th, a stop bow, prepare. The only thing I would add to that is that I'd like you to feel a little bit of a vibrato release, and that cannot cause any tension in the shoulder. Quite the contrary. You should feel the shoulder not engaged at the moment of that release of the vibrato, the fiddle resting in the collarbone, the joints of the finger completely free, so that it's a release, not a forced action to vibrate the eighth notes. I also start by just making sure that the student executes it perfectly in terms of, and I would just show my bow hand this way. There's a little bit of a resistance to pull down, like the elbow wants to open and the shoulder wants to drift, but it can't because the bow hair is stuck in the string, and then that releases through the collet. The so the motion based on my actions of the hand that I said could be passive or active are, there's a passive uncurling of the fingers when I'm preparing an up bow. There's a passive curling of the fingers when I'm preparing a down bow, and then that releases. On down bows, I make sure that the shoulder is free and that everything feels circular. That because the shoulder has let the elbow come in front of the body, even though I want the bow to travel straight, it feels like a circle, a figure eight, a counterclockwise circle at the frog, a clockwise circle at the tip. Okay? And the same is happening in the hand, circles in the hand. All of the actions of the hand that I showed keep the vertical free and the horizontal free. The horizontal and vertical, and that makes the hinge of the wrist work, and the shoulder free and the elbow free for the strokes. So we're feeling all of that. The final thing I would say is, once they've mastered just the fundamental stroke, which can be played on a double stop on 2 strings, and pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, and that's followed by the release of the collet, right? It's a very old stroke. I mean, there are people that aren't even classically trained, like what's his name, Johnny Cleveland, that can do these perfectly because their hands are just doing the right thing. You know, they're loose, and the bow is an extension of the hand, and that's what we want. We want this to be an extension of your arm, not something foreign. It's just something that's part of us. Just like this is, might as well be another arm. You know, all of this is natural. The final thing I would say about this study is it is a little piece of music, and there are different harmonies, and I would encourage you to react to them, react to what you hear happening. On the second line, there is what in theory is called a 5-of-5 modulation. So we modulate to the dominant key. Then we go back to a dominant 7th of the tonic harmony. And then there's a moment where we have a little implication of E minor with a B major chord resolving to E minor. But it's actually tricking us because we're moving back to the dominant again. And if we can react to that, if we can see that these harmonies have different effects on us, we might choose to do different amounts of sound or different types of vibrato or whatever it is. So when I play it, of course, I can have the student use fewer virtues. But when I was a little kid, I didn't like the teachers that made me play it like that. I had a lot more fun with the coaches that said, well, why don't you react to it? And they wanted... Yeah, dominant, resolution, articulation. It's all music. And so I would encourage you, when you're studying this work, to see everything that's in the bag, to quote Romulo Benavides, one of my dear friends and a wonderful teacher in his own right. There's so much there, and when you explore these little pieces as a beginner or an intermediate young fiddler, this way you are developing a flexible technique. You're developing different sizes of the same gesture. And that is incredibly critical for interesting music making. And again, once you've mastered the catches and the releases, you'll notice that when I actually played it, there's a lot less of that. I think we should be very cautious with where we actually put strong clicks. Mr. Lay said that a note either has click or no click. And in one of his teaching videos, Rodney Friend says, for the most part, there should be no click. And I would tend to agree. So I would say that the whole idea of catch and release is a means to an end. It's a means to an end. It's not something that we dogmatically plug in as a failsafe. Many of, including me and many of my colleagues misunderstood this when we were at Juilliard as kids and beat the daylights out of our fiddles with all these hard consonants and everything else, and it turned the violin into a percussion instrument. And it's not. It's a singing instrument, and should always sing. So I leave you with that, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please share and like my page and subscribe, and I look forward to you coming back for the next one. I may skip over to book 2 for a little bit now. Take care.